Wait, please!
I want you gone now!
Newport Beach, California. If you have never been, let me paint it for you. Palm trees that bend like they are bowing to the ocean. Driveways longer than most people's streets. Houses with more bathrooms than bedrooms and enough marble to build a cathedral. This is where David Mercer built his life. By 38, he had done what most men only talk about over beer. He had turned a mid-sized logistics company in Orange County into a regional powerhouse with contracts across 7 states. His name opened doors. His handshake closed deals. He wore plain suits and drove a clean black Range Rover and gave more to charity than most people earned in a year. Not because cameras were watching, but because his mother had raised him to believe that what you do when nobody is looking is your real biography. And then he met Sophia Calloway. She was the kind of woman that a room reorganized itself around. Sharp cheekbones, a laugh that sounded expensive, and the ability to make every man in her presence feel like the most important person alive. For exactly as long as she needed them to, they married in Scottsdale, Arizona, under an open desert sky. 300 guests. Flowers flown in from Colombia. His mother cried. His best friend Declan toasted them with something about how David had finally found someone worthy of his patience. Declan would later say he had never been more wrong in his life. The morning of March 14th, David was driving back from a site visit in Irvine. The roads were wet. The other driver ran a red light at 60 miles per hour. David's Range Rover spun twice and hit a concrete divider. By the time the paramedics reached him, he was conscious but broken. 3 fractured vertebrae, severe nerve compression in the lower spine, and a right knee shattered in 4 places. The surgeons at Hoag Hospital told Sophia that her husband would likely never walk again without significant long-term rehabilitation. And even then, the chances were uncertain. Sophia sat in the family waiting room and wept beautifully. His mother, Estelle Mercer, flew in from Houston that same night. She held her son's hand in the ICU and whispered things only a mother says in those rooms. The kind of words that are not really words, just anchors. But 2 rooms down, in a private corner of the hospital cafeteria, Sophia was on a phone call. She did not know that Declan had stepped out for coffee at the exact same time. He did not hear everything, but he heard enough. He can't walk. Probably won't again. I don't know how long I can do this. A pause. Just wait. I'm thinking. Declan stood with his coffee going cold in his hand. He thought about telling David immediately. He decided to wait and watch. He was not a man who moved on incomplete information. That was the smartest thing he did in this entire story. David came home to his Newport Beach mansion 6 weeks later in a wheelchair. The house had already changed. Nothing obvious at first. A different housekeeper. A locked room that used to be David's study. Sophia explaining breezily that she had reorganized a few things while he was recovering. Her tone was the conversational equivalent of a closed door, polite but final. David noticed everything. He was that kind of man. The first month, Sophia still played the role. Mornings in bed, adjusting his pillows, bringing breakfast on a tray with the kind of forced cheerfulness that only makes sense if you know it is a performance. But performance requires an audience, and by week 5, the audience was gone: his nurses, his mother, the visiting therapist. And when the audience left, so did the act. Week 6, she stopped eating with him. Week 7, she stopped coming home before midnight. Week 8, her older brother Randall moved into the East Wing. Let that sit for a second. Her brother moved into the house that David built. Randall Calloway was a man whose primary career seemed to be standing near wealthy people with his hands slightly open. He had the energy of someone who had never experienced a consequence. He moved through David's home like he owned it, helping himself to the kitchen at 2 a.m., having loud phone calls in the hallway, leaving half-finished glasses of David's scotch on tables like dropped receipts. A week later, the younger brother, Crew, arrived. Nobody asked David. Nobody told David. He found out when he wheeled himself to the dining room one morning and found Crew eating his breakfast at the head of his table, wearing David's robe. Now, I need you to understand something about David Mercer. He was not a man who yelled. He was not a man who threw things or threatened people or made scenes in rooms where people could witness his pain. His composure was not weakness. It was architecture. he had built himself, carefully, deliberately, the way he built his company, brick by brick. And nothing, not even this, was going to make him start tearing walls down carelessly. So he looked at Crew in his robe, at his table, in his home, and he said quietly, "Good morning." Crew laughed. That laugh would cost him everything. Behind the stillness, David's mind was running calculations. He called Declan from his phone at 11 p.m. when the house was quiet, not from his regular number, from a second phone, a habit from his business years, when certain conversations require discretion. "How bad is it?" Declan asked. "It's surgical," David said. "She's not impulsive. She's building something. You need Harlan." Harlan Voss was the best asset protection attorney in Southern California, and possibly the most expensive human being that David had ever paid by the hour. He also happened to have a brother who ran one of the most effective private investigation firms on the West Coast. By the end of that phone call, both brothers were on retainer. Sophia had no idea. One by one, David's people were removed from the house. First went Celestine, the head housekeeper who had worked for David for 6 years and who, on the day she was let go, pulled him aside and pressed a small folded note into his hand before she left. It said, "They go through your things at night, especially the study." Then went Bernard, the groundskeeper. Then Mona, the personal chef. Then the security team was replaced, quietly, efficiently, with a crew that Randall had sourced himself. Men who did not work for David. Men who reported to Randall. Within 3 months, David Mercer was a prisoner in a house full of people paid by his wife's family. Think about that for a second. His money, his house, his address. And not a single loyal person inside those walls. Except one. A man named Orion Fisk. Orion was David's driver. He had been with David for 11 years, starting when the company was barely profitable. He was quiet, methodical, and smart in a way that people underestimate because he never advertised it. When Sophia tried to have him replaced, she was told, incorrectly, that Orion had signed a separate employment contract tied to the company, not the household. That information came from Harlan Voss, delivered through the right channels, in the right language. Sophia's lawyers looked into it. It seemed legitimate. It was completely fabricated, but she did not know that, and so Orion stayed. And every morning, when David was driven to his medical appointments, the car was also driven past specific locations, picked up specific envelopes, and delivered certain documents to Harlan's office. Sophia thought David was going to physical therapy. He was going to war. By month 5, Sophia had stopped pretending. She had parties while David sat in his room. She introduced Randall and Crew to her friends as the men of the house, and those friends polished and Newport shallow, laughed and clinked glasses, and nobody said a word about the man in the wheelchair down the hall. One evening, a dinner party spilled into David's part of the house. A woman named Priscilla Vane. Old money, Beverly Hills. The kind of woman whose cruelty is delivered in complete sentences. Looked at David in his chair and said, loud enough for the table to hear, "Sophia, is this your help?" The table rippled with uncomfortable laughter. Sophia did not correct her. She looked at David and said nothing. That was the moment David understood, completely and without any remaining uncertainty, exactly who his wife was. He did not react. He excused himself politely, wheeled to his room, and called Declan. "Phase 2, he said. "Already?" Declan asked. She just made it personal. The next morning, Sophia found documents on the kitchen counter, financial reports, projections, law statements, a letter from David's CFO, a sharp-tongued woman named Bertie Alcott, indicating that Mercer Logistics was in serious financial distress, overextended contracts, regulatory penalties, imminent litigation. Sophia read every page. Then she called Victor Hale. Victor Hale was exactly the kind of man who gravitates to other people's disasters. He wore designer watches on both wrists and spoke about money the way some people speak about God, with total conviction and zero evidence. He had been circling Sophia for months, and she had been letting him circle. "The company is collapsing," she told him. "Then get out before it takes you down with it," Victor said. "That's the plan." She did not know could not have known that the financial documents she had just read were prepared by Bertie Alcott at David's specific instruction. Every number was fabricated. Every loss was invented. Every regulatory penalty was fictional. The documents existed for one reason: to make Sophia believe David's company was worthless, so that she would stop trying to take it through legal channels, so that she would focus instead on the liquid assets, the accounts, the cars, the real estate, and move fast. And when she moved fast, she would make mistakes. And when she made mistakes, Harlan Voss would be there to record every single one. She moved fast. A joint account containing $1.4 million was emptied over 3 weeks using wire transfers routed through a shell company that Randall had registered in Nevada. The transfers were made using authorization codes that Sophia had obtained from documents in David's study, the study that Celestine had warned him about. But here's what Sophia did not know. David had moved every sensitive document 3 months earlier. What she found in that study were copies. Clean, convincing, and completely traceable. 2 of David's luxury vehicles, a Bentley Continental and a McLaren 720S, were sold privately to a buyer that Victor had sourced. The paperwork was signed by Sophia using a power of attorney document that she had forged with the help of a notary that Crew had located. The notary's name, the date, the seal, all recorded by Harlan's investigative team, who had been watching the transaction from across the street. The real estate moves were the boldest. Sophia attempted to transfer the deed on a vacation property in Malibu, a 4-bedroom clifftop house that David had purchased in cash 6 years earlier, into a trust controlled by a company she and Victor had formed. The deed transfer was filed and flagged and quietly pulled back by Harlan's contact at the county recorder's office within 48 hours, replaced by a clean version with no record of Sophia's filing. She never knew the transfer had been reversed. As far as she was concerned, Malibu was already hers. The night it all became public. The night Sophia made her final, most theatrical move. It was raining. Not the soft California mist that locals call rain. This was a genuine downpour, the kind that turns manicured lawns into shallow rivers and makes the whole coast smell like wet eucalyptus. There were 14 people at the house that evening. Sophia's circle, a collection of women and their agreeable husbands. Victor standing near the fireplace like he had always owned it. Randall and Crew flanking the room like hired muscle. David was in the sitting room off the main hallway, alone. Sophia walked in with all 14 people behind her. She stood in the doorway and looked at him the way someone looks at furniture they have already sold. "We need the room," she said. "This is my house, Sophia. Not for much longer." She placed an envelope on the table beside him. "Divorce papers. Sign them, David. There is nothing left for you here." The room was very quiet. "You should have a lawyer look at those before you decide anything," Priscilla Vane said helpfully from the back, in a tone that suggested she was enjoying every second. "Get out," Sophia said to David. Not quietly, not privately, in front of all of them. Victor looked at his watch. Randall walked to David's wheelchair and "I need you to understand that this actually happened," physically wheeled it toward the front door. David let him. A bag was placed on the porch. His clothes, his medications, a few personal items. Crew had packed it. Crew, who had been eating breakfast at David's table in David's robe 4 months ago. The front door opened. The rain came in. David wheeled himself onto porch. Sophia stood in the doorway, her friends behind her, the chandelier light framing her like something out of film she had cast herself in. "Don't come back," she said, and she closed the gate. David sat in the rain for 40 seconds. His neighbors, the Wentworths from next door, who had known him for 4 years, watched from their window. They would later say that they almost went out, that they picked up their coats, that they put them down again. Nobody helped. Orion's car appeared at the end of the street 60 seconds later. Right on schedule. David got in. He did not look back at the house. 3 weeks after that night, news spread through Newport Beach's social circuit like a brush fire. David Mercer was dead. A car carrying him had gone off the Pacific Coast Highway near Point Magoo. The vehicle was found submerged in shallow water. No body recovered, but the evidence was considered conclusive. A funeral was announced. Sophia was informed by a courier. She received the news in her kitchen. Victor across from her, coffee going cold between them, and her face did something complicated. Something that was not quite sadness and not quite relief, but lived in the narrow corridor between the two. She did not attend the funeral. She opened a bottle of Veuve Clicquot instead. Victor poured 2 glasses. "To new beginnings," he said. She smiled and drank. She had no idea that she had just poured champagne at the beginning of her own ending. Here is something nobody tells you about greed. It does not feel like greed from the inside. From the inside, it feels like finally getting what you deserve. That is exactly how Sophia Mercer moved through her days after the funeral announcement. Lighter, freer, like a woman who had been carrying a heavy coat for years, and had finally dropped it on the floor and walked away. She redecorated the master bedroom first. Out went everything that had David's fingerprints on it. The dark wood furniture he had picked out himself, the framed photo from their first trip to Napa, the reading chair he had sat in every Sunday morning with his coffee and his newspaper, like a man completely at peace with his own life. All of it gone, replaced with white linen, chrome fixtures, and a kind of aggressively modern decor that announces a new owner without saying a word. Victor moved in by the end of the week. He wore David's house like a costume. He sat at the head of David's dining table and told stories about deals he had closed and places he'd been. And Randall and crew listened like men who understood exactly which side of this new arrangement their bread was buttered on. The household staff that Randall had installed called Victor Sir from day one. Nobody had to tell them to. The party started almost immediately. Not quiet dinner parties. Loud, expensive, look-at-us celebrations that started at 9 and ran past 2 in the morning, with Newport Beach's social circuit cycling through the mansion like it was a revolving door. Sophia moved through those rooms like a woman auditioning for the role of herself. Louder than before, sharper, more jewelry, more eye contact. The kind of energy that looks like confidence from a distance, but up close smells faintly like someone trying to outrun a thought. And when David's name came up, because it always came up, she handled it with a practiced lightness that made the people around her uncomfortable in ways they could not quite name. "He was never the man I thought he was," she would say, swirling her glass. The accident just made it obvious faster. The room would laugh carefully. Priscilla Vane would nod with the solemn authority of someone who had never once been wrong about another person. And Sophia would smile and drink and not think about the sound of rain hitting a porch. It started as a footnote in a financial newsletter that Randall had left open on the kitchen counter. Meridian Capital Holdings acquires majority stake in 3 Pacific Rim logistics firms. Founder remains anonymous. Sources estimate net worth north of $400 million. Sophia glanced at it the way you glance at weather reports for cities you will never visit. She was in the middle of planning her wedding. She had a florist on hold, and a venue coordinator flying in from Los Angeles, and a dress-fitting scheduled for Thursday in Beverly Hills. She did not have time for anonymous billionaires. Victor was similarly unbothered. He was busy moving money. See, Victor Hale was not just a man with nice watches and good posture. He was a man with a system. And the system was simple. Find a woman with assets, position yourself as a solution to her problems, and redirect as much of those assets as possible into structures that only he controlled. He had done it twice before, once in Miami, once in Dallas, and both times he had walked away clean because the women involved had been too embarrassed to pursue legal action. He assumed Sophia would eventually fall into the same category. He was already building his exit, while she was picking centerpieces. But before any of that could play out, the anonymous billionaire made another move. Meridian Capital Holdings, quietly, efficiently, without a single press release, purchased majority stake in Coastal First Bank. The same Coastal First Bank that held $2.3 million in debt attached to properties that Sophia had leveraged during what she believed was her asset consolidation phase. The same debts that Victor had quietly helped structure in ways that maximize her exposure and minimize his. When Sophia's attorney, a cautious man named Leopold Strand who had been trying to get her attention for 2 weeks, finally reached her, his voice had the careful flatness of someone delivering news they had rehearsed. "The bank changed hands," he said. "The new ownership has already begun a full audit of all outstanding accounts. Sophia, I need you to come in." She told him she would call him back after fitting. She did not call him back. The morning of the wedding, the Newport Beach mansion looked the way Sophia had always imagined it should look. White roses and arrangements, so tall they touched the ceiling of the main hall. Ivory ribbon wrapped around the staircase banister, like something out of film. Outdoor seating arranged on a rear lawn facing the Pacific. The morning light coming off the water in long gold sheets. A string quartet tuning up near the garden. 120 guests. Cameras from a lifestyle content company that Sophia had hired to document the event. Priscilla Vane in the front row in a hat. That was doing a lot of work. Randall and crew in matching suits, standing near the entrance with a satisfied posture of men who believed they had inherited something. Victor at the front, in a cream-colored suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent, watching the doors with the expression of a man who had already won. And Sophia, coming down the staircase in a dress that had taken 4 months and 11 fittings. She was, and you have to give this to her, stunning. Whatever else was true about Sophia Calloway Mercer, she understood presentation the way a painter understands light. She moved through that room like the protagonist of her own story, and for a moment, just a moment, she felt completely certain that everything had worked out exactly as it should. The minister began. The room settled, and then the doors at the back of the hall opened. Not dramatically, not with a crash or a burst of light. They simply opened, the way doors open when someone who belongs in a room walks into it. The string quartet stopped, not because anyone told them to. They just stopped. A figure stood in the doorway, tall, composed, wearing a dark suit with the quiet confidence of a man who had nothing left to prove to anyone in this room. Walking, not slowly, not with effort. Walking the way a man walks when he's been doing it his entire life. And the only reason anyone thought otherwise was because he allowed them to think so. The silence in that room was so complete that you could hear the ocean outside. And then David Mercer said, in a voice that carried all the way to the front row where Victor Hale was standing with his mouth slightly open, "Did you miss me?" Harlan Voss walked in 30 seconds behind David. Behind Harlan came 2 federal investigators, a county prosecutor, and 4 officers from the Newport Beach Police Department. Behind them came Bertie Alcott, David's CFO, carrying a document case the size of a small suitcase. And behind Bertie came Declan, who had been waiting 11 months for this exact morning, with a particular expression of a man who had kept a secret so long that releasing it felt like exhaling after a very deep dive. Victor moved first. He turned toward the side exit near the garden, the one that led to the driveway, and found Orion Fisk standing in it. Orion, who had driven David through 11 years and 8 months of early mornings and late nights, and 1 very carefully staged car accident. Orion, who stood in that doorway with his arms at his sides and his feet shoulder-width apart, and said nothing at all, because nothing needed to be said. Victor stopped. He looked back at the room, at Harlan, at the investigators, at David, and then Victor Hale, man of deals and watches and practiced confidence, sat down in the nearest chair and put his face in his hands. Randall tried a different approach. He tried words. This is trespassing. This is David's ex-wife's property now. He has no legal right. The deed to this property, Harlan said, producing a document with the efficiency of a man who had been preparing this moment for months, was never successfully transferred. The filing was reversed within 48 hours of submission. This house has been and remains solely in the name of David Mercer. Sir, I'd recommend stopping there. Randall stopped there. Crew said nothing at all. Crew had the instinct of a man who recognized a sealed room when he was standing in one. Sophia had not moved from the staircase. She was still holding her bouquet. The flowers were white roses, the same ones in all the arrangements, the same ones she had specifically requested, because she said they represented new beginnings. She looked at David, and the expression on her face was something that the cameras caught, and that would later be described by people who saw the footage as the look of a person watching the ground open beneath them in slow motion. "You were in a wheelchair," she said. Her voice was strange, flat, like a statement she was trying to verify against evidence that kept contradicting it. David said. The nerve compression was real. The prognosis was uncertain. What the doctors told you was accurate at the time. What they could not tell you, because I asked them not to, was that the treatment was working. For how long? 6 months before you threw me out, I could stand. I chose not to tell you, He let that land. Because I needed to know who you were. The room was absolutely still. And now I know. Let me tell you exactly what 11 months of documentation looks like. It looks like 47 recorded phone calls between Sophia and Victor, 7 of which contain explicit discussion of asset transfers using language that a first-year law student could prosecute. It looks like bank records showing $1.4 million moved through a Nevada shell company, with Sophia's digital signature on every authorization. It looks like a notarized power of attorney document for the vehicle sales, signed fraudulently, witnessed by a notary who had agreed to cooperate with investigators in exchange for a reduced charge. It looks like a forged deed transfer on the Malibu property, caught, recorded, and preserved in original form by Harlan's contact at the county recorder's office. It looks like testimony from Celestine, the housekeeper, and Bernard, the groundskeeper, and Mona, the chef, all of whom had been interviewed and had given detailed accounts of what they had witnessed in that house during David's most vulnerable months. It looks like Bertie Alcott on a stand, explaining in careful professional language how the fake financial documents were created, why they were created, and what Sophia's actions in response to those documents revealed about her intent. And it looks like Meridian Capital Holdings, David's company, operating under a name nobody connected to him, built during the months when the world believed he was either helpless or dead, which had quietly acquired the bank holding Sophia's debt, 3 of the companies Victor had used as fronts, and a lifestyle content company that was currently filming this moment in high definition. Every frame of this wedding was being recorded by a company David owned. The arrests were not dramatic. They rarely are in real life. Sophia was escorted from the staircase by a female officer who handled the moment with professional gentleness. Randall and crew were led out through the garden. Victor went quietly, which surprised nobody who understood what kind of man he actually was. Priscilla Vane left without saying a word to anyone. She moved through the departing guests with the tight expression of a woman recalibrating a great many social calculations at once. The string quartet packed up their instruments. The white roses stayed where they were. The legal process took 14 months. Sophia was charged with wire fraud, forgery, and financial elder abuse. The last charge added because David's mother, Estelle, who had flown in from Houston the night of the accident and had been quietly providing testimony to Harlan's team for months, was listed as a secondary victim of several of the financial schemes. Victor Hale was charged with conspiracy, fraud, and 2 additional counts related to Miami and Dallas cases. Cases that federal investigators had never been able to close until Harlan's documentation gave them what they needed. Randall pled guilty to 3 charges in exchange for a reduced sentence. Crew cooperated fully from the first interview and was given probation. The notary lost her license. Every property was returned to David. Every transferred asset was frozen, traced, and recovered, including the Bentley Continental and McLaren, which were located in a private garage in Scottsdale and returned without a scratch. The $1.4 million from the wire transfers was recovered in full, with interest assessed by the court. Sophia lost a mansion, the Malibu house, the accounts, the cars, and the lifestyle she had spent 11 months constructing on top of someone else's life. Victor, from a federal holding facility in Los Angeles, sent no letters and made no calls. Randall, from a minimum security facility in San Bernardino, sent 1 letter to David. David had Harlan read it and summarize it. The summary was 3 words. He says sorry. David did not respond. 3 months after the last court date, David Mercer announced the launch of the Mercer Recovery Foundation, a nonprofit providing financial assistance, legal support, and rehabilitation resources to accident victims and people living with physical disabilities who had been taken advantage of financially during their recovery. The foundation was capitalized at $12 million. Its first offices opened in Newport Beach, Houston, and Austin. Celestine was hired as the foundation's office director in Newport Beach. Bernard oversaw the grounds of the foundation's community center. Mona catered its first fundraising dinner. Declan joined the board. Orion drove David to every ribbon-cutting ceremony, every press event, every early morning meeting for the first 2 years. And then David offered him an equity stake in Meridian Capital, and Orion stopped being a driver and became something considerably more interesting. Bertie Alcott was promoted to president of operations. Estelle Mercer flew in from Houston for the Foundation's launch event and stood in the front row and cried the way she had cried in the ICU. Not with grief, but with a specific, physical relief of a mother watching her child come all the way back. 18 months after the wedding that never happened, a woman was spotted outside a community center in Newport Beach. She was standing on the sidewalk across the street, watching a crowd of people file into the building for a Foundation event. She was not dressed the way she used to dress. No chandelier earrings, no statement coat. Just a woman on a sidewalk, watching. Inside the building, David was at the podium. He was talking about a man he had met in his hospital room during his recovery, a construction worker from Anaheim, mid-50s, who had lost the use of both hands in a site accident and had come home to discover that his savings account had been drained by a family member during his hospital stay. A man who had no legal resources and no idea where to start. I knew that man, David said, not because I had met him before, but because I had been him. And the only difference between us was that I had people around me, one or two, but they were the right ones who stayed. The room was quiet the way rooms get when something true is being said. Outside, the woman on the sidewalk listened through the open doors. A city bus passed between her and the building. When it cleared, she was gone. Nobody inside noticed. Nobody needed to.